zone.
We're going to call the December meeting of the Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee to order. And we'll start off with our consent agenda. Are there any members of the committee or council members present that have items that they'd like to pull from the consent agenda? If so, let me know.
Chairman, I'd like to pull C1.
C1? All right. Are there?
I'll move about motion on the ballot.
Second.
All right. Mr. McIntosh, do you have any items? No. Okay. With that being said, we have a motion to approve the balance. Get the motion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And a second. All right. All in favor?
All right. It's like Robert all over again.
All right. That's the thing that go all the way to that satellite.
That's unanimous. All right. Item C1.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Well, hold a second. Item C1.
Item C1, ordinance revising Chapter B of the Unified Development Ordinances to further restrict limited campus uses in residential zoning.
All right. Mr. Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I just request that this be postponed to the next meeting. Based on the time that we have today and the number of things that have to be covered, I have some concerns about this particular item, and I think it would take up time that would probably be better spent. It's not a time-sensitive matter.
Look to City Manager and to Paul. Paul, you want to give us a...
Well, there's no particular time urgency to this. This was done at the request of Councilmember Bessie at the earlier this year when the rezoning for the Baptist Medical Center happened. So this is in response to that request. We do have people here from Wake Forest University, Reed Morgan and Nita Conrad from General Counsel for Wake Forest, and they were involved in this, but I defer to the committee's judgment.
Councilmember Bessie.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask that it be explained, and I have a couple of comments on where this is coming from, and then I have no personal objection to postponing further action until January. I agree it's probably not that time urgent. I can explain where the sort of the narrow issue of where it came from and how what's proposed here addresses the original concern that I asked planning to look at.
Okay. Paul, would you be so kind as to give us a very short narrative on this?
Okay, I am going to turn this over to Tiffany White on our staff, who's been with us about a year, but she worked on this text amendment. She has a little slideshow that she can go over the background on this with you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So as Paul mentioned, I was tasked with working on this amendment to the UDO regarding limited campus uses in residential zoning. I can just go through quickly, and then if you have any questions. So a little background, limited campus use provisions allow campus-zoned institutions to establish multifamily or office uses within 500 feet of C-zoned properties. The use provisions have been in the UDO since its adoption to allow institutions to expand while protecting neighborhood character. Prior to the UDO adoption, most institutions could locate in residential neighborhoods without any restrictions at all. There are use conditions currently for limited campus uses that require scale and massing consistent with the neighborhood, parking behind the building, location on a major and minor thoroughfare, and a Type 1 buffer yard. Currently, the limited campus use proposals are reviewed by the planning board only without a public hearing. As we mentioned, after the May 2017 zoning case involving Baptist Medical Center, Council asked us to prepare a UDO amendment that would further restrict limited campus uses in residential areas. And the staff recommended a change of the review authority for limited campus uses in residential areas from the planning board to the elected body utilizing a special use permit process. We solicited comments about these proposed changes from all the C-zoned institutions, various neighborhood associations, and the Neighborhood Alliance, and we also held a stakeholder meeting on August 22nd to discuss the proposed amendment. As a result of these meetings, Wake Forest University consulted with the other C-zoned institutions and proposed alternate language for UDO 281. Their proposal basically retains the existing planning board review authority, but proposes that limited campus uses not be allowed adjacent to campus districts with limited or special use zoning. For general campus zone properties, limited campus uses would be further restricted from what they are currently to properties adjacent to campus zoned properties defined as sharing a property line or immediately across the street from the campus zone parcel. It also maintains the current condition that the limited campus use structure must be within 500 feet of the campus zoning, even if it's on an adjacent parcel. So after we held the public hearing on November 9th with the planning board, who discussed both the initial staff recommendation and the Wake Forest proposal, they ultimately recommended the Wake Forest proposal to the elected bodies. So that's how we're here today.
All right. Mr. Bessie, would you like to add anything?
Sure. Now, originally how this came up, you may recall, was in the case of an expansion of the campus zone near Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center. The concern was raised during that rezoning process about how that might expand the zone in which campus off-campus, limited campus uses were permissible within a part of the neighborhood that was not covered by that 500-foot SWAT previously. We were able to come up with a fix within the context of that particular zoning case that we ultimately decided would work, and therefore that sort of objection was set to the side for that particular zoning, and we moved forward with it. That is a limited zoning. That's a campus limited. We had asked the planning staff to prepare a possible fix to that specific problem, and what I had in mind when I made the request was something that would permit us to authorize a new or an expanded campus zone without automatically stretching the boundaries of that associated limited campus use off-site at the same time. The proposal that the staff initially made would have permitted public input into the zoning request of each individual proposed limited campus use, not the rezoning, but the limited campus uses. So it would have moved that review from the planning board to the elected body and added a public hearing opportunity. Now, because what the staff proposed was a special use permit as opposed to a sort of a quasi-judicial rezoning, since that wasn't really rezoning, that would have been limited by the sort of the bounds of the thing that we always face in a special use permit hearing. It's a quasi-judicial matter. We're only allowed to make it on the basis of sworn testimony that comes in through the hearing process. Now, as it happened during the process of considering that as a possible change, Wake came up and proposed an alternative approach that, as was explained, left the decisions with the planning board on the individual uses, but added a couple of provisions, one of which is key to our ability to approve a rezoning for campus use without automatically stretching the zone in which that off-campus limited campus use could be a use of right. And either the original proposal or the alternative proposal that the planning board heard and recommended would address the specific issue that I asked for a fix to. I think there's a good argument that in terms of addressing that specific issue, the alternative that the planning board recommended is actually a simpler and more elegant approach, because it means that any time a rezoning request is made to create or expand a campus use, we can hear at that time during the rezoning quasi-legislative case whether we want to ensure that we put that limit, no expansion of the off-campus, limited campus use at the same time. If this tool had been available during the case where the issue was brought up, it would have been a simple matter. We could have said to the neighborhood, no, because this is a request for a CL, a C-limited zone, it would not affect any expansion of the zone in which the limited campus uses could be used. So therefore, the proposal that was recommended to us responds to the need I identified and asked for planning staff to prepare a fix for it. Now, during this discussion process, some of the neighborhood groups raised broader concerns, whether the existing authority is too expansive and whether it should be more limited. From my standpoint, that's a perfectly legitimate set of questions to raise. It's not the question that I raised, not the narrow question that I asked for a particular fix for. Therefore, as the old cliche goes, the fix that I requested doesn't have a dog in that particular hunt. It's a question that the council can choose to take up if it wishes, but it's not necessary to answer to be responsive to the fix I requested. Therefore, I have no particular investment in this narrow issue, whether we simply adopt what's before us after the council public hearing, or whether we hold it over for further review of that constellation of additional requested issues or not. I'd like to see this fix or something which contains this fix adopted in as near a future as possible, because I'd rather not see us have additional campus rezoning requests that we're without this tool to address sort of unintended side effects from. That's all.
Okay. And this short question with a short answer. Does your concerns have to do with the specifics of what Councilmember Bessie asked, or another matter within the zoning?
It sort of both levels, the expanded level he talked about, but also the specifics of this document, which moves basically the authority from the council down to the planning board, which the intent was the neighborhood wanted, I believe, to have city council members involved in those discussions in the public hearing in front of city council.
All right. Councilmember Adams?
I thought I was under the impression that that's what where they got to on their discussion. I thought they were like working together, whereas Neighborhood Alliance and Wake Forest and planning and others said, okay, we're going to let the council weigh in the quasi-judicial method, much like cell towers. Now, you need to understand that. It's based on fact. It's not based on emotion. It's based on fact. That's where the law steps in. Am I right?
Well, actually, the status quo, the current situation is that the planning board makes the decision. The council or the commissioners are not involved in the decisions on the individual requested, use for a limited campus use. So the proposal that was sent forward by the planning board would not change that. It is my understanding that some of the neighborhood associations want to see that change so that you can't get a limited campus use permit without a hearing before the council or the commissioners. And that's actually kind of a separate issue than the one that I initially raised, which is why I said that in terms of getting the problem that we had previously identified fixed, it's kind of beyond the scope of that. But it's a perfectly legitimate separate question if the council wants to take it up.
Councilman Clark?
Yeah. Be sure. And by the way, I think this really affects you two the most, because you've got Baptist Hospital and you've got
Other way around.
excuse me, you got Reynolda campus, you got Hawthorne campus. That currently, if we do nothing, this is handled at a planning board level.
Yes.
And what Wake Forest has proposed in exchange for keeping it at the planning board level, to put some additional restrictions on that would tend to satisfy your concerns that we saw previously. Whereas and I'm not sure quite what the neighborhood associations want, but there seems to be some indication that they may want to go to the council level. But the challenge with that, it is like the cell tower. It is a quasi-judicial review, and those are not fun for anybody. And I think particularly for the neighborhood associations, because you have to be sworn testimony. It can't be hearsay. It can't be, I feel this way or that way. You got to have experts and all that other stuff. And my own preference would be to stay away from those quasi-judicial. Is there any way we can have a public input at the planning board level?
Yep. So, with this item, what I'm going to ask specifically, since I think Councilmember Larson has raised some questions, is to submit those questions in writing to staff so that they can answer those specifically. And we'll bring the item back if there's not an objection from the committee to have further specific discussion. It is my thought, more so like Councilmember Bessie's, that if this is a matter specific to the question that was being asked for us to address, that we deal with that question. And if there's a desire to look at this more deeply from the community, that we deal with that in a separate action and manner so that we don't pair the two actions together. Councilmember Adams?
Yes, I would like staff to send us the information, much like we've asked for when we did the cell towers or did the accessory dwellings and all these other things. Give me a side-by-side of what all this documents say, all of this says, versus good, better, best, worse, better, best. What is expected, what is being asked. We got 2 or 3 opinions, discussions, suggestions wrapped up in this right now. And I think the council needs to see it somehow broken out as to what it is what we're trying to get to. Okay, because if you read the Neighborhood Alliance letter, they're okay with what they were discussed at the planning board about it going to the quasi-judicial, long as residents have a voice. So, but we need to understand in all of the council, what is it that we're trying to get to? Because right now, don't get me wrong, we've read all of this, but it doesn't really give us what would make everybody, what could be a win-win for everybody versus where we are right now. Because we got Wake Forest, we got the neighborhood, we got the planning board, we got the council. We just need a better look at all of this information on all of these documents that you gave us.
Councilor McIntyre?
Just quickly, I think one of the big issues that I've heard from neighborhood people is that they saw the case around the hospital to allow sort of a leapfrogging expansion of zones, and I think kind of everybody around the table is saying that's not really what we want to see happen. So I think we're pretty much there, but I think we got to make sure, because it's a fairly technical argument, I think we need to make sure that that those concerns are dealt with. And I think in the situation of Northwest Ward with campus, they're pretty much settled. I mean, their near campus uses haven't changed much in a very long time, and are sort of accepted into the neighborhood and deemed to be as part of the neighborhood. So from my standpoint, I'm happy as long as we're not granting the ability or codifying the ability to sort of leap out and absorb more of the neighborhood without public scrutiny.
All right. Staff, we've heard those conversation, and we'll have this item come back to us in January. We'll now move to the general agenda. Staff has stated that they would like to hold item G8 until January. Item G1.
Item G1, demolition item for Michael Stephen and Aubrey Cobbler-Smith for property located at 4400 Glen High Road, located in the East Ward. This item was continued from the November meeting of the Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee.
All right.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
This case was final today. I have pictures to show that the property is in compliance, if you'd like to see the photograph.
Somebody hit the button.
Paige, can you push the magic button?
You said they had to go all the way up.
It does take a while. See, look at there.
Upside down.
It looks upside on the moon. It would be.
One of the concerns that the customer brought up last time was that there was a tree involved with falling on this property.
Yeah.
The tree ended up not doing as much damage as was thought in terms of the roof damage. And so he was able to complete all of the compliance issues that we had cited. We actually checked the property 2 weeks ago, and then we went back out today and took additional photographs. You see the date is 12/11.
And so the property has been brought into compliance?
It has.
Okay. So that means that there's no action for this committee to take. All right. Item G2.
Item G2, property owned by Picardo Giampolo and Valencia Denise Alejandro for property located at 837 West 7th Street, located in the Northwest Ward. This item was continued from the November meeting of the Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee.
This is another case. 837 West 7th Street has also been brought into compliance. This case was originally taken in February, and the customer acquired the property, purchased it in August, and we have current pictures from today, or yesterday, I'm sorry, where we've gone out to check the property.
You said it has been brought into compliance? All right. Mr. McIntosh, any?
Yeah, is the big tree that's down, is that on the property? And is that something that we can look at in the scope of this? Because I know the majority of it's still there.
On 4400, both properties had trees,
Okay.
but 837 didn't have as much of a tree problem as 4400.
All right, I'm good with it.
Okay. So again, there's no action for us to take on this item. Item G3.
Item G3, ordinance revising Chapter B of the Unified Development Ordinances to amend regulations for accessory dwellings.
Mr. Norby, oh, how we love to talk about accessory dwelling buildings.
I know. Unfortunately, we had a situation that has happened since the approval on September 5th with UDO 267, which is a reminder. The final decision of the council was all future detached and attached ADUs must be approved through the special use district rezoning process. So that's both detached and attached. Formerly, detached was allowed through Board of Adjustment, special use permit, and attached was allowed administratively as long as they met certain conditions. Some attached accessory dwelling units that had previously been approved through the Board of Adjustment had approval conditions requiring renewal after a certain period of time. Typically, the renewal periods were 5 to 10 years. Many involved manufactured home accessory dwelling units. They were a little more typical in some of the outlying areas of the city. And then the applicant in that case would have to apply for renewal. There would be a new public hearing held at the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment would approve it if the home had continued to be maintained properly and there were no issues that were involved that they heard at the public hearing. So the September 5th amendment wasn't real clear on how to deal with these particular accessory dwelling units that were previously approved but with renewal conditions. The city attorney's office advised us to be cautious about this and to tell those with expiring renewal periods that they would now need to go through the rezoning process as per UDO 267. As we began to advise those with approaching renewals, the reaction from someone was pretty strong. That the accessory dwelling unit had already been approved previously through a public process, hearing process. They were abiding by the Board of Adjustment set conditions, and having now to have to go through the rezoning process simply to keep their already approved use going would be much more lengthy, involving multiple public hearings with both the planning board and the city council, and certainly much more expense to go through that process. So I guess this is more of a question for the council, that if this particular situation was an unintended consequence of UDO 267, we have discussed between the attorney's office and I a solution that could be I'll kind of use some slang here, but a limited grandfather of those previously approved accessory dwelling units with renewal dates. And what we're talking about, if this were a desired solution, is those particular accessory dwelling units with the renewal requirement would continue to get their renewals from the Board of Adjustment. But if they expired without applying for the renewal, then if later on they wanted to reestablish, they would have to go through the rezoning process as per UDO 267. Just to give you an idea of the potential additional rezoning caseload, if those that had the Board of Adjustment renewal had to come through a rezoning, we looked through our case files and found 66 cases approved by the Board of Adjustment that had renewal conditions with it. 2 of them had already expired before the September 5th council public hearing. So therefore, they've lost any sort of claim that they should be allowed to continue through the Board of Adjustment. The 64 remaining would be rezonings that could happen between now and 2027. Those are when the expiration dates would be applying. And in looking at where they are in the city, there's the vast majority of them are in the northeast and southeast wards. Each of those have 21 each. And then the remainder are scattered among the east, the north, the southwest, the south, and the west ward. Interestingly enough, none in the northwest ward. So that is where we are. So City Attorney and I wanted to get some advice from you, your reaction as to whether this is a fix that needs to happen, or do you wish to kind of continue to let us, to have us advise these people that they need to go through the full rezoning process?
All right.
And if so, we could initiate a text amendment that would go to the planning board in January and would likely get back to council in February.
All right. Councilman Adams?
Yes, thank you and staff again for all of the legwork and boots on the ground to try to get this crafted to something that we could pass. But as you said, we just misstepped on this one. We didn't see what was coming at us because we were trying to address it. But I, as a council member, I agree with you that we do the grandfathering to those folks that already are under the conditions and those that are remaining. Anybody new coming to us, or the ones that have let theirs expire, Mr. Chair, I think they should come to us if needed. But no, I don't think people that's been doing this forever, because of something that we want to do, they should have to deal with any unjust burden of finances and the many, many public hearings and all of that stuff. But I think this is a quick fix, Mr. Norb. I really do.
Mr. Bessie and Mr. Clark.
Yeah, I agree. This was an unintended consequence, and this is a reasonable fix, and I would support sending it forward.
Mr. Clark.
For 17 years, I have sat on this council
Here we
and never gotten a call on an accessory dwelling until 3 days ago. This is the gentleman that has a property in Gordon Manor area. I don't know if you've spoken to him or not. He has everything approved. It's for his mother-in-law, a small dwelling for her. It's detached, and she has now reached the point in her life where she needs to have some additional folks helping her. And I don't know if he's expired or close to expiring.
Ever remove it, then obviously there's no need to renew. But typically there isn't a sunset to them. But if it's a manufactured home, there's generally a lifespan on those. But I don't know if this is a stick built or whether this is a manufactured home.
Okay, now, this does not currently exist, so they would have to build it. It would be stick built. But what you're telling me, if there's an accessory building that's a manufactured home, because I do see those coming through where they renew them.
Well,
Board of Adjustment.
Correct, but first of all, if this doesn't exist right now,
Yeah.
the constituent that's contacted you, they will have to go through the rezoning process. This does not fix that situation.
Okay, well, they went through and got all the paperwork done, but they never built it.
We would have to look and see when the paperwork was approved. If it's,
Okay.
if the special use permit has been issued within the last 2 years, it has not expired. They would just have to come in and get the building permit within.
Okay. I don't know how long it's been, but what you're commenting here are, and I do see that the letters that come out of that, where someone's got a manufactured home and every 5 or 10 years it comes up for renewal, and that would be evergreen. Continuing.
Correct. Of course, keep in mind there are manufactured homes that have been approved through the special use permit process that aren't accessory. This doesn't affect those at all.
Yeah.
The ones where if you have a house or a manufactured home and you have a second manufactured home on the property for someone to live there, it would affect this. This impact, this text amendment that was approved back in September has impacted the ability for those folks to get a renewal.
Okay. And I would say to conclude, I would support Ms. Adams that if it's already there and the planning board has already done this, I would think it would be in our interest and theirs for them to continue. And it's a very limited number, it looks like 60, 64. And I think over time, as you say, those will, attrition will take care of a lot of those.
Mr. McIntyre.
I was curious to see how many we do get annually, how many requests we get. We continue to see these come before us for new applications?
Well, of course, the renewals with the 64, you have to average that over 5 or 10 years because some of them have 5-year renewals, some have 10, but probably 5 or 6 of these will average over the course of a year. Of course, any new ones would come to y'all, and generally new ones we probably have seen 4 or 5 a year over the last several years.
Okay. So anybody wishing to...
Those would be rezoning cases.
Right.
Right, and what we don't know yet is what effect will that have on new cases coming forward.
Right. The 2 that have expired automatically have to come back through the rezoning process, or? Okay. All right.
They lost their approval because they didn't even apply for Board of Adjustment renewal before.
But that's going to be painful. And I'm curious about the list here that you've got. I mean, the 2 that are in my ward, one is at Dr. Maya Angelou's house, and the other is at a 16,000 square foot residential house. And they both say no expiration date on them, and so I'm curious as to why they're on this.
Right. Some accessory dwelling units are approved with no expiration date, so that's why your 2 didn't show up on that accounting right there. It's only the ones that had a expiration date, I believe.
But this list is all the permits that were issued within a certain period of time. Okay.
Why did she get a non-expiring?
Good question.
Is that our house on Bartram, her old house?
They just gutted that.
My mother lives across the street. That's a permanent type of cottage on it.
I was going to say, it's up to the Board of Adjustment. If it's stick built, a lot of times they will approve them with no expiration date. If there's opposition, sometimes they'll approve them with an expiration date. If they're manufactured homes, they generally always have an expiration date.
And she has sold it, by the way.
Councilmember Larson.
I just need a little clarity on this renewal. So we have 64 out there over the next 7 years or more. We're going to see these things rotate up. Can we anticipate then that they will keep going until they fall off the wheels or whatever, and get demolished? I mean, it's going to keep coming back to the planning board that these 67 will continue to go through a cycle, and do we have the authority as a board to request that every 10 years or every 7 years or 5 years that these come back for a second look by the planning board?
Whenever they come up to the Board of Adjustment for a renewal, it's up to the Board of Adjustment as far as the term that they give them.
To decide whether they come back again?
Correct. 5, 10. I mean, theoretically, they could do a 20-year. If they want to, they could do a 1-year. It really depends, again, on the circumstances. If there have been issues with maintenance on the manufactured home, if there have been issues ancillary to the manufactured home, sometimes they will still give a condition. Keep in mind, or give a different term. Keep in mind that the term that the Board of Adjustment gives is simply a term for the renewal.
Right.
Minimum housing code, the zoning ordinance, everything applies within that 5-10 year period of time. So if the manufactured home falls, or secondary dwelling, if it's not a manufactured home, falls into disrepair, other things, community development. So let me get the name correct. Community development can still work with them to bring the house up to compliance. If it's a zoning violation, there are other remedies besides just the Board of Adjustment renewal.
Because I guess the point is, I was trying to figure out whether we're going to see more expiration dates as they rotate through, and then doing the landscape, and we're stuck with them if we don't like them or whatever. And I mean, I like the idea that because this is the old chapter of these accessory buildings, that we not forget basically that they are in the landscape and they need to be monitored, because the new ones are going to be intensively reviewed and have certain standards that are going to be a lot higher than these that are before. And I would like to hope that somebody keeps an eye on these through time, and then if they fall out, that they are removed or what have you.
Each time something comes up for renewal, our staff goes out, checks the sign, checks the site to make sure that it hasn't fallen into disrepair, make sure it complies with the ordinance. So if there are issues that arise, it's addressed at the time of renewal. Now, if you're concerned about their, accessory dwellings that are out there now that have a term limit, getting an approval without a term limit, I suppose that could be something that could be addressed through the text amendment and say, no secondary dwelling approved through this renewal process with the Board of Adjustment shall receive a term longer than X, or something to that effect. And that's something that could be considered as part of that text amendment to address that concern.
That was the question, is whether we could ensure that these 64 buildings are still being monitored as accessory buildings on the landscape under the old system. I'm fine with that. I'm not asking them to come in and resubmit, but I would like to think that we are keeping an eye on them as we would have before.
Well, right. So as it is now, prior to our actual action by doing this, there was consistent review of each one of those going through the Board of Adjustment review based upon the time that was allotted. If we take an action here in allowing for those to be grandfathered, the same type of process will be followed as had been followed in the past to ensure that those properties continue to have some engagement from the Board of Adjustment.
And since this isn't the final stop for this, it's still got to go to the planning board and back here. What we could do is make that wording adjustment in the text amendment and make it clear that those renewals will continue to be subject to the same scrutiny that they are now.
Fine.
All right. Councilman Adams?
Chair Montgomery, I'd like to make a motion to approve this ordinance, G3.
Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any questions on the motion? All those in favor? Those opposed? Mm-hmm. I think that's unanimous.
Yep.
And again, this simply gives direction to staff to move this back to planning to come back with a specific amendment. System frozen?
Robert did it.
I've joined and I voted.
That's what I'm saying, see?
See, I've been voting all day.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Item G4.
Item G4, Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Program Update and Annual Report.
Good afternoon,
Riley.
Chairman Montgomery and members of the committee. So on an annual basis, staff prepares an update on the activities of the city's Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Program. And so this is the time for that report. You have in your packet, I think, the full annual report. But I am going to have Taisha Hinton, who is our Business Inclusion Manager, provide you with a quick update and take you through some of the items that highlight our 2016-2017 performance in the program. But before I call Ms. Hinton up, I do want to acknowledge that Emma Allen, our chairman of the MWBE Citizens Advisory
Chairwoman.
Committee. Yes, Chairwoman is present with us today fighting through illness, but she is not here to speak to this item. I just wanted to acknowledge her presence.
Could she stand up so we could? Can't see you back there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I'll ask Ms. Hinton to come and give you a brief presentation on our 16-17 activity.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Chairman Montgomery, members of the committee. As Mr. Riley stated, I'm going to provide you with a brief overview of our 16-17 annual report and figure out which button I need to click. There we go. So you do have the trifold in front of you, and I'm going to highlight the items in that order to the best of my ability. Overall, we've spent from fiscal year 14-15 to 16-17, there's an increase from 8% to 9% in overall spending. In our subcontracting category, which is one of the 4 categories that we tried, of that, 58.2 was spent citywide, and 11.6 million was spent with minority and women-owned businesses, which equates to 20%. We've implemented 2 brand new workshops, which I'm going to give you a little bit more detail on later in the presentation. And we've instituted a new online form for city employees to be connected with minority and women-owned businesses that provide the good or service that city departments need. So those 4 categories where we track spending, and this is on the far left side of your trifold. Construction and repair is all of our active spending on formal and informal projects. So those are funds that we've spent. So, for example, last year, FY 15-16 bond projects kicked off a big part of that. Our second category we're going to touch on is subcontracting, which includes all of our closed formal range projects that we're closing this particular year. So projects like the Benton or Quarry, while we know they're opening and they're functioning, they're not included or they're not closed out to the hub office, so they won't be in these particular numbers. I'm going to talk about our purchase card, spending, and then goods and services, which is all of your tangible items like firefighter boots, software services, on-call agreements, things like that. So in construction and repair, and you're looking at the blue line for fiscal year 16-17. In construction and repair, we spent $3.7 million with minority and women-owned businesses, and your handout gives you the breakdown with it per MBE and WBE firms. In our subcontracting category for this fiscal year, we spent $11.6 million. And in our P-card spending, we're at $149,000 there. And in goods and services, it's $4.8 million. And what this is showing you is from fiscal year 14-15 to 16-17.
Question for you.
Yes, sir.
After the meeting, can you all send this to us so we can have this? Because we can't, at least my glasses, my prescription isn't that good to
absolutely.
Read
we'll make sure we get that.
In
your yearly subcontracting, this is the information on the far right side of that handout that you have in front of you. And we're just showing you from fiscal year 2006 to 2007 until today, the increase in spending. So again, for fiscal year 16-17 in subcontracting, which includes all of your closed formal range projects, we're at $11.6 million. I spoke a little bit earlier about MWBE Made Easy. This is a tool that we implemented in July of this year, which gives city departments a convenient way to reach out to our office to solicit what their needs are. So whether that be catering services, anything in that discretionary level, so anything under $20,000, employees are able to go to the Employee Center, click on an MWBE link that marketing helped us put together, and they can fill out what's called the upcoming purchase opportunity form. So they tell us what their needs are, when they need it by, any type of specifications and deadlines, and we send that out to our database on a weekly basis to inform the MWBE community about what departments' needs are. So we're trying to help them get those 3 quotes that they're needing. Staff can also learn about new MWBEs who have registered on the city's database. So staff can just go to the Employee Center, and we have PDFs for each month of new vendors that are interested in doing business with the city. And we implemented this to help increase vendor rotation on those contracts under $20,000. And another key work item being ensuring employee accountability regarding our commitment to spending with minority and women-owned businesses. One of those new workshops that I mentioned earlier, when I came into this role, I identified a need for MWBE firms to have assistance with bidding and estimating projects. So we have a lot of work, but there are some companies who are new to the city or new to bidding and need to know just the first steps to get their foot in the door. So we implemented what's called Bidding and Estimating 101, which is a series of programs that we plan to have. We did in collaboration with Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, City County Purchasing, and the Institute out of Durham, North Carolina. There were 45 MWBEs present, and we talked about responding to bid solicitations, insurance requirements, how to prepare an adequate bid. The Institute provided a free software called OnScreen, and OnScreen helps you bid different construction projects. And so that was very, very helpful for our firms. And it was a 2-day workshop. We used our key work items for this program to, again, enhance outreach to MWBE firms about services that are available to them, and to develop partnerships and relationships to identify potential mentoring firms. Another new workshop we implemented is called Is Your Good Faith Effort Good Enough? This was with prime contractors who work with the city of Winston-Salem. We wanted to make sure that we communicated the change in culture, essentially the 10% minimum not being the goal. As you can see in our projects, we've set MWB participation at the Benton over 30%, Quarry Park 35%, and we wanted to make sure we communicated to these general contractors our standards for judging good faith efforts. We have a very, very active Citizens Advisory Committee led by Chairwoman Allen here, and we needed to, again, communicate those changes in policies, procedures, and expectations. We had over 67 attendees, which included 35 general contractors who participate here in Winston-Salem. We wanted to also speak to them about how we set goals, which I'll get into a little bit. We've revised our methodology for setting goals for our formal construction projects and ensuring that these contractors were aware of how we evaluate their payment to their subcontractors. We've implemented not releasing final payment until all of our subcontractors are paid in full. On our site visits, we make sure that even when an affidavit B, where the contractor can perform with their own workforce, those are still site visits for our office to ensure that they're really using their own workforce for those projects. And then this information is included on the back side of that handout that you have in front of you. And it just talks about our additional accomplishments. So I spoke a little bit about revising our goal-setting methods. So what we do now is we're sure to include the number of registered or certified MWBE firms, their relative availability, and the nature and scope of the project when we're setting goals for our project. So that's how we're able to put the 10% aside and work towards the 20%, the 25%, the 30%. We then, when we identify who those firms are at the beginning of the goal-setting process, we circle back to them after the pre-bid meeting to ensure they're aware of who attended the pre-bid, so we can help facilitate the submittal of responsive quotes. We also held our fourth annual MWBE Mixer, which was at Wake Forest Innovation Quarter. That's when we have 2 different rooms. It's kind of like speed networking. We have city staff in one room, general contractors in the other room. At MWBEs, there's a bell that rings, and there's a 5 to 7 minute spiel so they could have that one-on-one time with both city departments they like to do business with and general contractors. And lastly, our division is also responsible for overseeing the Section 3 compliance for projects housed in community development. In this particular fiscal year, we awarded $1.2 million to Section 3 businesses. It's a federal program not based on race and gender, just off of income. So our low to moderate income businesses, $1.2 million was awarded there. And we've also certified 13 business as Section 3 firms and collaborated with several organizations throughout this fiscal year to enhance partnerships and education to MWBE firms. And I'll take any additional questions you have.
All right, Councilmember Clark. Couple things.
On your one for the contractors, I think it was entitled as good enough, or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that they can get online? Because oftentimes, when we have a specialty type project, we get bids from contractors that are not local or people we normally do business with. Is that something they can easily get a hold of?
The presentation from
or
yes,
a
sir.
booklet or something?
Yes, and so we had a couple of general contractors who RSVP'd and they weren't able to attend, so we sent it out, but we can definitely make it public.
Yeah. I mean, if we're building a fire station, that's no big deal, but when we redid one of the water treatment plants, there probably aren't but 4 or 5 contractors in the country that specialize in water treatment plants, and they're scattered all everywhere. So that would be very helpful. We could give them some.
Absolutely.
Number 2, we had the comment made yesterday in finance because we were looking at what we were looking at? Fairgrounds, yes. In your 101 class, do you go over how to fill out the forms for people to become a state certified
Hub business, yes,
Yeah.
sir. So we have weekly sessions for hub certification.
Okay.
Businesses can come in walk-ins or they make appointments. Every year we also hold what's called our Hub Certification Day, where we provide technical assistance in completing the application. The application is free and valid for 4 years, so we do that, I say, on a weekly basis, and then we have a program every year to assist with that certification.
Okay, so if there is a minority or woman-owned business that would like to participate in it, we have staff time that's free of charge that's held regularly?
Absolutely.
Okay. Last one, and I'm looking at the chart that's on your pamphlet, and it's got goods and services, $103 million, and minority woman total was 4.89.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm only going to pick that one because hopefully that's the easiest to do. I would like that 103 million number adjusted to only include instances where a minority or female business bid. My point is, so much of what we buy, and I'll use a fire truck as an example. I think there's 3 companies in the country that make fire trucks, and none of them are women or minority owned. So obviously that they don't have an opportunity to bid there because that's not a market they participate in. We're getting ready to go out for bid for 3 street sweepers. Again, I can't imagine there being many companies in this country that make street sweepers. So my concern in this whole area is not that we don't do our best, is that so much of what we buy, in another category would be software, because software is very, very specialized, that there are no vendors to bid even if we wanted to because of the nature of what we buy. So I'd like to know what that $103 million, how many of those dollars did a minority or woman business even bid on?
Okay.
And then I can see how successful they are in getting stuff that they do offer. It would be very difficult, I think, to do that in the other categories, but in that one, I think it shouldn't take more than a month. I don't think. Because you got to look at every contract for this year. I realize that.
We can work with purchasing to get you something.
All right. Thank you very much.
Cool. And Councilman Adams next, but just to interject that, just for us to be careful in that, I totally understand what Councilman Clark is getting at, but sometimes in those categories where we don't have a person to bid, doesn't necessarily mean that the business doesn't exist. And so that it won't be as clear to, and I don't know how we quantify the fact that there are bids out there, but they didn't bid on the things. But just because they didn't bid, I agree, there are not a whole bunch of people who are going to make fire trucks or street sweepers, but there may be other instances where they exist, but they just didn't bid for whatever reason. And just whenever you all are putting that information together, how you
can break that out as the third number.
Okay.
But that's just something else. That answers the question, why aren't they? One question is they don't exist. Number 2, is that the problem, or is it a case of people not bidding, and why are they not bidding? Maybe
Absolutely.
But yeah.
Chairman, what I might propose to address that is, as we look at this data, we can, based on the good or service that's being offered, try to do some type of scan of the local market area to see who may offer that particular good or service and figure it out that way. That could be one way to address the presence of MWBs in a particular area.
Oftentimes at meetings, I keep a little running total when we do this, and oftentimes it's 80 to 90% of what we approved at a council meeting, there was no minority vendor because they're so specialized. And Jeff, you brought up yesterday software. We approved a contract. The software is so specialized, there's only one company we can buy it from.
Yeah. What I would ask in that same piece is also with the time frame you pull it together, that gives you enough time, not just check our local market, but to check other cities in the same type of RFP that we put out, whether or not in those communities they have minority businesses that bid, because that may also speak to our process. That it doesn't directly say that we'd have to infer some things, but if they're bidding in other communities and where they are, those kind of stuff. I don't know how accessible some of that data may be. I'm sorry, Councilman Adams.
That's okay. Again, thank you guys for what you do. Particularly, thank you to the committee. I know your work is not easy, but the things that you do, it impacts just more than the city of Winston-Salem, us. It impacts the people in the city as well as those that have been left behind for so many years of being able to be a part of getting some of these dollars that we pay. The report is good, but, you know, I think I remember a few years ago, I was, and we'll get to that, I'm sure, on one of the other items, I was very adamant about a disparity study. And the council and others, staff and others, did not want to go there. But this is where we are right now, whereas it's like, it's easy for us to say, we don't need to do that. Let's implement some of the things from what we found through our own study or something that we did. But nobody ever really came back and showed me or told me it was working. See, that's the issue I have. We implement things because we don't want to get too into it, I think. It's the hard work. That's part of government. These are the hard conversations that, in my mind, as an African American and a minority woman, we don't like to think about that there are groups being left out of the economic prosperity of America. But that is the way it's been, and it's been that way for a long time. So one of the things I'd like to see, if you don't have it in your next couple of agenda items, is those things that we gave you to go do, Mr. Mann, the city manager, as Mayor Pro Tem says. I need to see, well, how did it go? You know, and then we come back, I'm saying, when we, as Councilman Montgomery and the manager has heard me say this before, when we put in a document for the world to see that there are no minorities, women anywhere that can do this. Well, we don't say anywhere. We just say there were none. But yet we'll go on the outside and we'll allow others to bid outside of North Carolina even for some of these contracts. I'm wondering, as the council member said, and I've asked this before, minorities are minorities just like white people. Why we can't go on the outside and give a minority an opportunity to be a part of this? Because ultimately they might hire some of our folk in the city and allow them to be trained and developed. These are the innovative things that we got to start thinking of long term versus, again, in the box. MWBE, do you feel like we're doing all that we can do to attract more minority business? Because this number, I've been on this council since 2009. And it was, you know, back in 2009, we thought, okay, that's a good number, whatever that was, 10%. But again, I'm bringing up, we need to be benchmarking other cities to see where their diversity is and minority inclusion. And if we are still where we are, when we can be better, again, it should reflect the diversity of our city and our taxpayers that pay the money to pay these contractors. I want to know how we stack up compared to other cities. And when I see that we spent 7.8 on minority business and 12.5 on women business, and we know who most of the women businesses are, 8% versus 12%, that's a big gap. That's why I feel like, again, I know you all are working as hard as you can, but I'm sure council will see in the next couple of presentations, we got to up our game, people. If we're going to talk about the poverty initiative and the thought force and closing the gap, this is one of the main places we can start at, closing the gap, without creating a whole lot of ordinances and policies. We can make this happen. But again, I don't want you guys, I know y'all, when you come in front of me, you might get a little jittery, but I'm okay with that. Because that's what I'm here for, to ask the tough questions, to test you to be your best, so that the citizens in Winston and others, that this ordinance that was created many, many years ago will help those that need to be helped. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Larson and then McIntosh.
Oh, thank you. I noticed we said 13 new, you said 13, you approved 13 new contractors or services, the number of people that have been added to the list of qualified people, right, companies.
We certified 13 firms.
Certified 13. Is that do we have any trending on our certification of firms? Are we trending up? Are we trending down? Are we stagnant? This application has to be completed every year, correctly? They have to be renewed?
It's valid for 4 years.
For 4 years?
Yes.
Okay, so what are I think I just, provide services to the city. Do we have that kind of data every, knowing how many companies we're adding per year?
Sure. So once we provide the technical assistance to help with the certification. Once the state confirms those businesses as minority or women-owned, we can get that data for you. So our last fiscal year with technical assistance, I think we're about 35. This year we're about 58 to 60 with providing the technical assistance. But we can reach out to the state hub office to see, are you looking for how many businesses in Winston-Salem are?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, what we're saying is that, are people getting in the door? First of all, that's the question I asked yesterday, I think, is the process of applying and getting approved and getting your name on the list, and what I'm beginning to hear is that's part of the game that we play with the state. But what I'm curious about is, what is our track record or what is our trend of getting minority contractors locally on a list that then you train? Obviously, you're very aggressive about providing, additional training and filling out, various bid forms and a variety of sort of keeping people up to date once they're in the house.
Sure.
But the question is how do we get people into the house? And so, I'm trying to figure out, are we doing a good job? Are we generating enough people coming in? Are we losing people after the 4-year period? Are they dropping off because we're not retaining them for some reason, or they go out of business, or what is the mass of business that we're dealing with, and are we expanding the base? Basically, is what I'm trying to get to this, and this will come back up, I think, when we start thinking about surveying the whole landscape of this topic. But I've got to sort of ask, are we aggressive enough in getting people on the list to provide these services? Because if they're not on the list, then they don't get a chance to even get involved in the game.
Sure.
So that's what I'm asking.
Councilmember McIntosh.
You may have covered this, but I'm curious as to, we're talking about how do MWBE firms get contracts, but I think an awful lot of the work that goes through this process and successfully ends up going to these firms is through a subcontract basis. How do we manage that? Do we have a registry of companies that we say, okay, for instance, a masonry company comes in and they're not an MWBE firm, but if they had the resource available to them to win the bid, if they just hired the subcontractor, how do we mechanically get that?
Sure. An approach unique to us here in Winston-Salem, in addition to the state's hub list, we also have the city's vendor database. So that was, to my understanding, created to help our chambers come together to know who's in the city that provides what types of businesses. So oftentimes, even in our goal setting process, we can go to this spreadsheet that's available internally and externally, and we can click on your example masonry, and it'll show us the firms that have self-certified as being able to provide that service. And the unique piece to us is that for our formal construction projects, companies can enter into a subcontract agreement without the hub certification, so long that they have it before the project is completed. So that gives them the opportunity to get their foot in the door with the self-certification and then obtaining the hub certification before the project is completed. And our office does the hand-holding throughout the entire application process to ensure they're certified.
So I'm Jeff's Masonry, and there's a job out there on our bid list, and I go to you and I say, I want to bid this job.
Sure.
You give me a list of potential qualified subcontractors.
Correct.
Okay. And that happens relatively early enough in the process for me to go do my vetting.
It's usually right after the same day of the pre-bid opportunity. So if you're the prime contractor, prime contractors reach out to our office. They need a list of MWBE firms. It's sent to them. And then on the other end, MWBE firms that we're aware of, we send them the list of prime contractors to, again, solicit that process of submitting quotes.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Councilman Bessie.
Yeah, just a compliment. I thought that the two workshops on the bidding process and on good faith efforts were particularly well directed.
Thank you.
All right, Councilman Clark.
Yeah. Get back to Mr. Mason's company here. All that's on our website or something that's easy to get. You don't have to wait.
The database?
Yeah, the database.
Yes,
and all that.
it is on the website.
Yeah, okay.
And we're currently working with our IS department to make that even more accessible and user-friendly, but it is available right now.
So even before you bid, if you wanted to go look and see who's there, it's...
Yes, you can utilize our list and then the state hub list as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Which is advantageous, as I know we've had certain bids that have come in, and the prime contractor will get that bid, and it's due on Thursday, and they send an email to a minority contractor on Monday and expect them to have something turned around within that short period of time. And then they mark on the application no response, and so those kind of things are not doesn't help the process.
Absolutely.
And that's why I think it's important. Is your good faith effort good enough? Yeah. So I think that was a great question. This is just a receipt of this report. Any other comments, questions? Again, thank you so much for the work you all do. Thank you to the members of our community that works very diligently to assist our staff in this process as well. So we appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Good. Item G5.
Item G5, resolution approving a progressive discipline policy for contractors failing to make a good faith effort to satisfy their contractual MWBE participation goals.
Good afternoon again, Chairman. What you have before you here is an item which proposes the adoption or the creation of a progressive discipline policy for contractors who fail to meet their contractually obligated MWBE goals and are subsequently deemed to have not made a good faith effort to achieve those goals. Section 2-3 of the City Code authorizes the city manager to disqualify general contractors for bidding on construction and repair projects for a number of reasons, one of which is a contractor's failure to make a good faith effort to satisfy their contractually obligated MWBE participation goals on formal construction projects. And formal construction projects are those with an estimated value in excess of $300,000. What we are trying to do with this item is create some structure and clarity about how remedial action can be administered in instances where that good faith effort is determined not to have been made. The code does not provide that level of detail, and we're just seeking to provide some clarity and consistency to the administration of discipline in these instances. So you have in your packages the proposed progressive discipline schedule. I will say that this document has been reviewed by our Citizens Advisory Committee, and they felt it ready for presentation to you all for review. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the document.
Councilman Bessie?
Matter of interpretation in the schedule, when you say missed percentage, if the percentage target was 12%, you missed it, you were between 10 and 12%, but you didn't hit 12%, that would be less than 1.9%.
That's correct.
Okay. Just want to make sure I was interpreting.
Yes, that's correct.
Councilman Clark? We had a a fairly recent case had to do with I think some stormwater work done over near the Haynesville Ranch schools over in that area. You don't need to get it there. I'm just curious how many times this is an issue. So I'm remembering one or two others, but not that many. Just be curious. And secondly, it gets back to maybe semantics here. Are we treating the women and the minorities separate or in total?
So this would be in total. So say, for instance, you have a goal of 10 and 10, and the M percentage is missed by 2%, and the W percentage is missed by 2%. That's 4%. Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay. And that would be column 2 then?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments from members? Councilmember Larson?
Notice in the ordinance, the proposal of $300,000 is actually written into the document that we're going to vote on. Is that likely to move?
Well, the $300,000 represents, so we perform good faith efforts only on formal construction projects.
Right.
So the threshold for that is $300,000. And so I guess theoretically, could that threshold move in terms of what we consider formal construction? Sure, I think it's a matter of state statute, and the city attorney may have some comment on that.
That 300,000 state? Okay.
There is actually a discrepancy between when MWB starts, which is 300,000, and state formal, which is 500,000. We started at
Mm-hmm.
the language is in the state tax, and that's because we start to put it up to
Just follow up. So the threshold for the amount is set. Can somebody explain to the newest council member what the percentages are and how those are established that are the targets which are not written into this ordinance?
How the goal setting?
The goal set. The goals that are to be complied with are not part of this ordinance. How is somebody to know exactly what those percentages are that they're targeted for if it's not part of this document?
So as a part of a contractor submission, they would have, so the goal setting process happens prior to a project hitting the street. So at the point at which bids are being received, contractors are aware of the MWBE participation goals that have been established for that project. So they know in advance, typically in advance, if they're not going to meet at least pre-construction those goals.
So when the solicitation for bids is made, part of that specification says a percentage of participation that is expected on this particular project, and that percentage varies from project to project.
That's correct.
Based on a decision that's made by.
So there's a goal setting process that staff does on every formal construction project, and that's done, varies by project. Those goals fluctuate based upon availability, based upon the scope of work for the particular project, and that's how we arrive at the goals for a particular project.
Is that set by staff or the committee, or who sets that goal?
So staff sets the goals.
The staff, city staff sets the percentage goal.
That is correct.
With the base by the council has already established a floor.
Which is what? What is that base?
10%.
Right.
10% base. And then, okay, so on this thing it says 10% or above on the
So
last
this actually, what you see up top, those percentages just speak to the percentage by which a goal is missed.
By they miss the
Yes.
whole thing.
So say, for instance, there's a project which has a 10% minority participation goal, and the contractor has a 0 in that column. So that, based on this chart, that would represent that final column a miss of 10% or more.
And so in essence, when we look at the goal setting components of that, the council has the authority and has utilized this authority to set a standard on just what is expected when it comes to projects. At times, because of understanding certain contractual challenges, that goal may actually fall below on the front side what that expectation is because of what we know going into it. But the council has set a standard along with staff and along with the MWBE the committee reviews the submission information that's there to be able to dictate whether or not a good faith effort has been made on those efforts that had been received at the beginning of the process.
That's
Did I
correct.
incorrectly articulate that?
No, you did. And I'll add to that, Chairman, that so there are two instances in which we become aware of goals for a particular project not being met. There's the initial receipt of bid, award of project. The goals have been established by staff. They've made it into the bid document. We receive the bid, and they have not, the contractor who's submitting that has not met those goals. So the contractor at that juncture, before the project starts, is subject to a good faith review, which is conducted by our MWBE Citizens Advisory Committee. There's also the case at times where on the front end, a contractor essentially on paper will meet those goals, but at the closeout of the project, they haven't met the goals. And so at that particular juncture, they are also subject to a good faith review. So there are two points in the process where a contractor could be subject to this process.
Mr. Larson, does that?
That answers my question. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions?
Somebody come. These folks have been doing this a while. They know what businesses there are minority folks, and not particularly in construction. You mentioned masonry. That is one that does have a very large minority participation. And that's why they can look at a particular project. And I think you mentioned the Quarry Park was 30% or something. Because you kind of have a feel. It's not perfect, but they have a feel for what's being done and what the universe of folks are. You can go to the website and look at the names that are there. So it's not just a shot in the dark. There is some science to it, and experience, and just folks that are in the business understand that if it's such and such, well, it's a pretty good chance that we're going to get a higher percent. Whereas if you're buying fire trucks, it's going to be a lower percent.
All right. Any more questions from the committee? If not, is there a motion?
Move for approval.
Moved by
Dan, you going to second?
Ms. Adams.
If you want.
Well,
All right, I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Clark.
Lose, you lose.
let's see. Yeah.
Hey, you made it.
All in favor, yes. Those opposed, no. That is unanimous. Moving on to item G6, and Mr. Raleigh, you can continue to stay standing there.
All right, I certainly will do that, Chairman.
Item G6, MWBE disparity study.
Chairman and members of the committee, for the last several months, our Citizens Advisory Committee has discussed making a recommendation to the Mayor and Council regarding whether to pursue conducting a disparity study. And at their November meeting, voted to move that recommendation forward first to this committee to consider the city undertaking a disparity study. And so there's some information in the item which kind of gives you some background on what a disparity study is if you have questions. But I will introduce again Chairwoman Allen, who is here to speak on behalf of the committee and relay some of their discussions related to this particular item.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And in deference to your packed schedule, I will tell you that we've limited our presentation to just 2 hours. And so if you'll bear with me as we work through every
We moved the
point.
strike from the...
Thank you.
Yeah. Can you give your name and address for the record?
Say it again?
Name and address for the record.
It's Emma Allen. I own Emma Allen State Farm here in the city, and my address is 310 West 4th Street, the Neeson Building, just uptown, so not very far away from here. And I will tell you that my fellow committee member, Dick, has joined me in case he'd like to weigh in. We've had some really vigorous conversation around disparity studying. As a relatively new person to Winston-Salem, I will tell you that I understand that this is not your first rodeo as it relates to talking about a disparity study, but what we have figured out is much of what you're discussing right now around whether or not we've got capacity as it relates to MWBE participants and whether or not there's an opportunity for us to do more around this work gets answered with the disparity study. The truth is, as opposed to us kind of feeling our way through, and I will tell you that the staff has done really, in my opinion, a yeoman's job around kind of getting the work done and moving the numbers forward. But even if you look at our performance, and I will tell you that I've gotten out of my sick bed to be here, that's how important it is to us. we're all over the place just in terms of our performance. And so if you look at 2007 till now, our percentages really have been all over the place. You know, there's some years when we've done a really good job, and there are other times when we've not done so well. I think that's a direct result of the fact that we don't have a clear plan. A disparity study does that for us. It lays out in really specific terms kind of what capacity is around minority participation, but it also lays out kind of what our objective ought to be. And so Evan talked a little bit earlier about, you know, our disciplinary policy, which is a new thing for us, right? So in all this time that I've been involved with the committee, which is fully 3 years, I'm about to roll off here in a little bit, you know, unless, you know, you make another decision. Frankly, we've had a number of contractors come to us and say, just can't get it done. Sorry about that, guys. And what we've done about that is nothing. And so what this committee has advanced forward really in the recent future is said, you know what, we're not sitting here to have you come to us and tell us that, you know, there's nothing that you can get done and for us to give you a pass on that. And so to city manager's credit, he has said, you know, we've got to do something about that. And so finally, we've got some accountability around kind of what happens when you don't meet the goal. A disparity study does that for us too. It lays out a clear roadmap for us in terms of what ought to happen in no uncertain terms. It's not a secret. Council knows, city knows, vendors know kind of what has to happen. And it also lays out what happens if we don't do that, what the accountability piece is. From my perspective as a new person to your city, relatively new, I will tell you that we've touted ourselves as a city of diversity and inclusiveness. And what do we want to do about that? Is that something that we're just saying we believe in, that we're willing to do, or is that something that we believe is a part of our culture and that we insist on? So with that, you know, I'll shorten my 2 hours to any questions that you might have for me or for my, you know, fellow committee member about kind of where we are and where we land on this issue.
All right. From the committee, are there questions, comments? Ms. Clark?
A couple questions, comments. First off, I know that Greensboro had one of these done, I believe.
Yes,
Am I
and
remembering that
what
correctly?
we've done, we've worked very closely with Greensboro. We've invited the author of the Greensboro disparity study to be here with us so that we've got some intelligence in that regard.
I think we passed that out 4 years ago. Could you skip me?
We got you some sections, but we can get you the new one.
How
Charlotte,
big is it? I mean, it's something I might have a hard time. Oh, no.
we need to get you the executive summary.
Executive summary, yeah.
Charlotte just did a new one. We just got.
Just get the executive summaries on those two. Number two, $300,000. Is that a real number?
It's the number of the statute.
So in addition to the city of Greensboro, I think their study came back at about 275,000. I know that the city of Asheville and the city of Charlotte also recently conducted, and the numbers were closer to 350,000. So I'd say somewhere between 275 and maybe 350,000.
Okay. Last one, I was reading through your thing, and I'm just going to read you the sentence. I want you to explain it to me. It says, for example, in response to a lawsuit challenging this minority and women business development, parentheses, MWBD program, the city of Charlotte suspended its race and general conscience MWB goals for a race and gender neutral small business opportunity SBO program. So I guess I'm asking, what's the difference between an MWBD and an SBO?
Charlotte?
Right. That's the difference.
It's a lot of acronyms.
You darn right, yeah.
The MWBD program includes small businesses. So businesses, when it being race and gender conscious, would be MWBE, focus on minority women-owned businesses. Race, gender neutral, focusing on MWBEs as well, but small businesses as a disadvantaged population as well.
So, okay. A WMB is kind of what we have, right?
Yeah.
We have an MWB, correct?
But we don't look at small businesses.
Correct.
You telling me Charlotte only looks at small businesses, or they look at both?
Combination of both.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. That's all.
Ms. Adams?
And as a matter of fact, whenever we talk about minority and women's businesses at these conferences in Charlotte and Greensboro, council members and others all around me, they always make it plain to me that they went ahead, took the plunge, and did the study. And a lot of times, as Ms. Allen and Mr. Raleigh and other staff will tell you, I'm always asking, well, how did you guys get this passed? How did you move to this point? And, you know, for me and mine, I'm like, why are we still on the fence? So I know that I've talked to them and the city manager, and I'm glad to see this coming to the council. Again, it gives us an opportunity to stand on the fence as to who's going to jump over the rail and who's going to stand on the fence. But again, like the mayor and others were here yesterday, you can't talk about poverty, income inequality, and not start to pick at certain pieces that we can actually put some teeth in and do something for the greater good of the community that could eventually be touted like Charlotte, Greensboro, Asheville, and all the rest. And Winston-Salem is really a city of diversity and inclusion, and not just something that we say that makes us feel good in a report. So, you know, Mr. Chair, I'm going to support this again, and I'm going to make a motion that the $300,000 or whatever we need comes from the Economic Development Fund that we use for so many other things that we use to drive economic development in this community. This goes back to a need. So I'm going to find it very hard if anybody says that we can't do this, or maybe, again, we shouldn't because of the price tag. It wouldn't have cost us this if we'd done it 3 or 4 years ago when I asked for it. So that's my motion.
I think it's information, so we'll be giving direction to staff in reference to this.
I'll take that too.
We have to bring it back to both committees, finance and to this committee.
And you can
That's
give me
how
my executive
passionate I am.
summaries in the meantime.
Yes. So
Mr.
we'll just add in closing early, so I'm giving you some time
Well,
back in your life.
Hold it real quick. I want to get his question, then I'll
Yes,
come right back.
What tools that we are not currently using would affirmative results from a formal disparity study enable?
Well, the fact of the matter is we don't know until we get the study. And so to the point around the cost, there is a cost, certainly, with conducting the study, but also there's a cost in not doing it. And so for people like me, for example, who've moved here, we're looking at cities who, you know, are invested in making sure that we have a fair chance at success here. The millennials especially, who are no longer corporate folks, you know, who are looking for retirements, are looking for places where they're likely to thrive as small businesses. So the cost of not doing it is affected, you know, in terms of kind of how people see us as a city. So you ask about what the tools are. The diversity study gives us a clear plan for our city, just in terms of kind of what we ought to do and what tools ought to be implemented. The truth is we don't know. We're guessing right now as a city staff, just in terms of some of the programs that you saw them advance forward. But without the study, we can't say for sure what those are. You know, if you guys can add to that.
I had, if I may clarify the question, I had been under the impression that there were some specific actions that we could take if we had a specific disparity study that showed a specific affirmative result, that we were failing. And that's, I just wanted to know specifically what those tools or measures that we could take would be.
Councilmember Bessie, we do have, actually as part of the last time council considered this question, produced a chart which showed cities that had conducted disparity studies, looked at their recommendations, and kind of had a category that said yes or no in terms of whether we, without a disparity study, could enact that particular recommendation. And I'm happy to provide that to you. And I can give you some examples, but it's quite lengthy.
Give me a couple of cheap examples, and yes.
Sure.
And then send us a copy of that, too.
Sure. Okay. Here's one from Columbia, South Carolina's disparity study.
Great city.
Actually.
Some of it is.
Let me look at, yes.
Certain high schools.
Excuse me, City of Memphis. Set annual, one of their disparity study major recommendations was to set annual aspirational MWBE goals. Goals would be set at 80% of the availability determined by the study in each business category for each race, gender, ethnicity category. These goals would range from 0 to 18.33%. And that particular recommendation is not one that we could enact without a disparity study. Let me see if there's another more that's kind of lengthy or wordy.
I can read it. That's
Okay.
Yeah, just send us that.
Send it to me. Thank you.
But we can send you this chart, which kind of goes through each one.
All right. Councilmember Larson and Adams.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that, again, thank you, Ms. Allen and Ms. Hinton and Mr. Raleigh and all of the others that participated in this. And I see Hassani Mitchell. Are they here? Is he? Okay, make sure he knows that we said thank you for you guys sticking to this as long as you have. We're trying to get there. Just don't give up on us, okay? I tell you that. I said every time I see you, just don't give up on us.
Thank you all.
300,000 is a lot of money, but now I don't know what happened 3 years ago or 4 years ago when it was proposed and obviously not approved. I think things are quite different now. I have a lot of confidence in our staff. We have a very energized staff who wants to look at this. I think also that we've sort of plateaued as a city right now, and we're sort of floundering around trying to figure out how to move to the next level of engagement. And this involves small businesses as well as minority women, other categories of business development, which I think is a legitimate. I would not impose upon the city manager where the money comes from. We'll let him worry about that. But I do think that the timing is maybe right for us to get a new baseline in this city to understand what is, not just create another study to put on the shelf. We need some baselines and some data to work against as to what is reasonable for us to do and what is not, and what we can move quickly on and what may take longer. And only way I know to do that is either impose it upon staff and ask them to do this, which I'm not sure at this point in time is the most efficient way to address it. The other choice is to come forward with a outside, and I appreciate your concern about credentials and ability to withstand scrutiny of the intellectual aspects of undertaking this study, because I think that's critical if we do not have that kind of authority behind this. But it sounds to me like the industry is there, that we have sister cities that have done a lot of this, and that it seems to me like it's time for us to begin to weigh in on it.
Councilman McIntosh.
Thank you.
To me, the study serves two functions. One is offensive and one is defensive. And the defensive side of it is protecting ourselves in cases of litigation if we are deemed to not be living up to our responsibilities. But the other side of it is offensive, and can a study point us in a direction that is going to create more wealth across the community? So I would like to see, if we're going to do a study, I'd like those things to be somewhat paramount in what the information we're getting back.
All right. I think, Mr. Manager, we're hearing some comments from the committee in terms of bringing something back around. I do, however, believe that the council has a fiduciary responsibility, so where funds come from is part of our responsibility as well. But
absolutely, I can only recommend it's council's decision.
But I simply say that just to say in terms of hearing what has come up in the conversation, and if the committee would bear with the moment, I would ask Mr. McCann if he wants to come forward and make any comment in reference to the great work that he's done in community. He is his own successful business owner, but he has done a great amount of work, I know, in this arena. To add any comment to what has been done.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Name and address for the record.
Gary McCants, Greensboro, 817 North Elm Street. First of all, Mr. Chairman, thank you, members of council, city manager, and staff. This is probably a historic moment for the city of Winston-Salem. I think you're taking the right direction in terms of looking at the disparity study for the MWB program. As you know, the city of Greensboro, we're actually finishing our fourth disparity study, which gives us a baseline to continue our MWB program. So I think you're on the right track. Final report for the fourth study will come up first quarter of 2018. We should have some very salient points to continue our program and increase participation with minority women in business enterprise programs. So I'll leave it there, and certainly we'll continue to work with the city of Winston-Salem as needed.
And is there a place, if the members of the committee wanted to see the information that you worked in Greensboro, or just at least for us to know kind of the things we can expect or ask to be a part of our study?
Absolutely. I'll leave my contact information and any information you need to reach out.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. And in that information that we do bring back as well, just from a staff standpoint, I know the questions have come up before. One of the concerns is the potential negative impact of having it. So when we bring that, just to make sure that we have that clear on pros and cons of everything as we move forward. Okay? Information, correct? Direction? All right.
We'll be back next month.
Okay. All right. Item G7.
Item G7, report on sustainability needs based on STAR community rating. This item was continued for the November meeting of the Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee.
Good afternoon. I'm James Mitchell with Property and Facility Management. We have just finished the sustainability program in our department has just finished a comprehensive look at sustainability issues in our community. The report and the recommendations are in front of you. However, we want to come in and bring you just a very brief overview of those recommendations and to answer any questions you may have. I'm going to let Helen Peplowski give our presentation. She's been working with our sustainability program for the last 2 years and is the one who did the heavy lifting on this report. So with that, I'll turn it over to Helen.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay. So as it was mentioned, we recently, back in February, completed the STAR Communities Report. What we have put together for you all is a recommendation report based off of that program that is meant to be a supplement to the 2017 to 2021 strategic plan that was released back in May in order to provide measurable outcomes for the priorities identified in that plan. All of these recommendations come directly from the STAR framework that we have worked with, and they cover all 6 of the sections in the strategic plan. In the report, the recommendations have been organized to correspond directly to a relevant priority from the strategic plan. And so what you'll see is that the strategic plan priorities are italicized, and then the STAR recommendations are listed in bullets underneath those. Just a quick point to note is that STAR only awards credit for the actions being done by the city or county government itself, not by outside organizations. So if you see a recommendation in there that you think an organization might be doing, if we don't have any hand in that as a government, then it will not count for credit. And so just some quick points to make before going over the plan itself. We were rated a 3-star out of 5 potential stars. And so what the next step now is for us to do is to start setting targets for the future based off of these results. So our next recertification will come in 2021, which lines up very well with the strategic plan, which is why we set it up this way. And really what we would like to see by 2021 is an increase in points in each of the 7 STAR goal areas. And so something to look for here is that, there are some sections where there are more recommendations that came out of them than others. That's because we tried to take the priority recommendations from 15 objectives where we have the most room to grow, and we try to focus on those areas. So here's just a quick example of what the report itself will look like. So like I said before, the priority recommendations are related to the 15 objectives where we have the most room to grow. And then here is just a quick example of what those will look like in the actual report. So for example, we have listed livable neighborhoods section from the strategic plan with the specific objective under it, so expand housing assistance programs. In the report, there will be a STAR recommendation under that, maybe multiple of them, and this is the same for all sections. And so the sections that relate to the priority recommendations we have made from the strategic plan are livable neighborhoods, healthy environment, quality transportation, and service excellence. Again, all set up the same way. And this is just a small selection, so there may be more objectives or strategies from the strategic plan. And then you, again, can see the specific STAR recommendations in the plan itself. We also have secondary recommendations. These come from all the other objectives in the STAR framework. These are included because they will still contribute to the increase in our overall score. And that's really what we're looking to do in the future. And so some of these recommendations come from or relate to the economic vitality and diversity section, safe and secure communities, livable neighborhoods, and healthy environment section. And so I will be happy to take any questions regarding the plan or how we did this.
All right, Councilmember Adams.
Yes. I just think it's rather, strange, and maybe it's because I just don't understand, again, I know I was a part of this at the beginning, and I really thought that we were going to get a higher rating than 3 stars, but I know it's work to be done. Under health and safety, and I noticed all of the different headings, subject matter that we looked at, but I find it kind of strange that we would look at a community, these needs and headings, and look at diversity, sustainability, water, greenway, transportation, but we don't, and maybe I'm missing it, the actual health. We talk about safety police and making sure they get trained to be unbiased and stuff. But we never talk about food. And we know that there are food deserts, and we know that we struggle with trying to get people to bring even a portable farmers markets to our communities. Mm-hmm. We know that we have some of the highest health issues, diabetes, stroke, high blood pressure, and a lot of it revolves around food. Mm-hmm. And yet it's not mentioned, so can you help me with that?
Yeah, there is a section that is called Food Access and Nutrition under the Health
Correct.
and Safety.
HS4.
Yes, and so we actually did, if I remember correctly, fairly well in that already.
We did.
Go
ahead. I'm going to let that go. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so if you're looking for recommendations that relate specifically to that, the reason they likely weren't included in this is because it was one of our higher achieving objectives. In fact, health and safety was one of the top 3 performing goal areas out of all of these. And so we've really decided to place emphasis on some of the other sections just because, there was more room to gain points from them. However, one part you mentioned, food deserts, that is accounted for in that goal area. And I don't remember off the top of my head, but likely there was a threshold that needed to be met, and we likely received points for meeting that threshold, even if it isn't an extremely high threshold.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to see that information, and Mr. Manager, I'd like to see who put that together. Because how can I sit here, or any of us sit here, and say that we met a threshold on food access, particularly in the urban core African American communities, when we can count grocery stores on less than 5 fingers. Right. So I need to know what was said, because I need to be able to look at that, and I don't understand that. I really don't. I don't understand.
We'll certainly send you that section of the STAR report with all the supporting data and stuff.
Good.
And what may be also, and I don't know if they give you all the scoring card so that can be compared.
Correct.
It's kind of like the minimum housing code. You don't get a violation if you meet the minimum standards, and so that may be kind of what we're looking at.
And something else I will like to say that might have contributed to our high score here. So this is getting a little bit more technical, but the way that the framework is set up for every single objective listed up there, they are split into outcomes and actions. Outcomes are the final goals. That's what we get the most credit for. Actions, there are more of them, so we still have a potential to get a lot of points that way. And so, again, something else that may have happened to give us a higher score in this area is that we met more actions and not yet the objectives, which maybe would be at the highest threshold we could meet. So that could also be contributing to that.
All right. Mr. Larson?
Yeah, I'm very excited that the city is trying to actually tie into the STAR program. 3 points or 3 stars is great. 4 stars would be better. I think we can achieve that. This graph that we're seeing up there, which is very comprehensive, I'm trying to figure out how we integrate on sort of a working basis the agenda and priorities that are listed in these categories with the work programs that we deal with every day. And as we get things that come forward, we see within the master plan or strategic plan categories that they fit. And I'm wondering if, in order to elevate the awareness of this program and the importance it has environmentally, which we're all I'm very concerned about right now. The mayor's committed us to sustainability programs nationally, made statements into that area, as to whether or not we can apply these criteria, these points, as we make decisions on how we're spending the money and what we're doing. I would like to see, not buried somewhere beyond our vision, this brought forward as part of our decision-making process, that I know when we make a decision that it will apply directly to this agenda. And it doesn't necessarily mean it takes priority, but it means that it's one of our decision-making factors. We can bless this thing. We'll put it, close the shelf on it and put it away and say, good luck, people. Go ahead and implement. I would like to have a better ongoing way of knowing that this is an agenda that the city is, in fact, trying to accomplish. And the only way I know to do that is if it's a food desert and we talk about a food desert and we're trying to make a decision on whether to do a co-op or something, that this, in fact, would meet, HS4 category and would, in fact, earn us so many points if we choose to go down that road. Is that reasonable? And from an administrative perspective, what that means is the ability to put that into the decision-making process as we go along.
Right, I understand the councilman points, and I look to the city manager all for some insight in reference to that. Our current driving factor in that area would be the strategic plan adopted by the council, and I think this may be able to serve as an additional tool to inform the strategic plan in some way.
It's in there.
Right.
We use
in the strategic plan, the council approves the strategic plan does have the healthy food options and that goal. What we're trying to do, and you notice it now in all the CARFs, we're trying to tie every decision to the strategic plan. I was actually pleased with the way they put this together because they spent a lot of time making it a subset of the strategic plan. So we're moving towards more and more being able to communicate to each of you and to the community how every decision we make, and more importantly, every dollar we spend, moves the needle. Because if it doesn't, why are we doing it? So you're going to see more of that. The Office of Performance and Accountability is working on a new process where we'll give you a quarterly report. We're going to be coming, I believe, in January or February with a briefing on that to every committee. In February, we're going to bring a briefing to every committee on all the performance indicators that are tied to the strategic plan and to city goals to each committee to bless or change. So our goal is to drive all of our decisions or recommendations to you for decisions based on how does it move the needle to do the things that this council wants to do, which are all tied to quality of life.
The strategic plan is the driving force. There's no question about that. What I'm looking for is a way to not wait until, when's the next one, 2021, when we resubmit, that, in 3 years we sit down and we say, oh, we've done this or we've done that or we haven't met our goals or whatever. I mean, I would like us to be an ongoing monitoring of some sort to know our progress in this area so that when we apply in 4 years, we know we're in a strong position as possible. That's what I'm looking for.
Councilmember McIntosh, Bessie, and Clark.
Just real quickly, Councilmember Adams and Montgomery and myself were at the rollout of this over at Wake Forest. I'm trying to remember, score 3 is not a bad score, right?
Correct, yeah. That's right. And we also are only the second community in North Carolina to be rated, which is also great. We're actually having a meeting with the city of Greensboro in January to try to convince them to partake in this process as well.
Thank you.
All right. Councilmember Bessie?
Yes. One of the specific priority recommendations under service excellence closed feedback loop with citizens, I just want to make sure that everybody understands where that came from. When it says closed feedback loop with citizens, that specifically originated with the need for our CityLink when taking service-related issues to get a report back to the citizen that makes the report on what was done in a timely manner. We don't have a mechanism for doing that now. And that's a real glaring hole. That is what people always say to me about calling CityLink. They say they never hear back. It may or may not ever get done. And they're always told, we'll get to that within 3 business days or whatever, the standard response is. And it simply doesn't happen. And we don't have the mechanism in place for following it.
Councilor Bessie, they're trying to make the STAR recommendations work within the framework of strategic plan, but in the strategic plan, there are 3 specific action items that staff's working on this year directly related to having that system for feedback.
Customer service.
Councilmember Clark?
Yeah, I do think it's important, and I'll use the analogy of the school system that gets criticized for teaching to the test, that we don't teach to the test here, and I'm going to give an example in a minute. We need to do what we think is important to our city, and I will read you one of their recommendations. Demonstrate at least a 5% increase in the past 3 years in the mileage of sidewalks, particularly on arterial or collector roads. The last place I would want a sidewalk is on Silas Creek Parkway, which is an arterial road. I do want one. I put one on Peace Haven because that's a kind of a major thoroughfare through a residential neighborhood. But I certainly would not want to waste the money of putting a sidewalk on Silas Creek, particularly in my area. Now, other areas like Mr. Bessie's, it more touches. But the last place I want people walking is the side of the road with no curb that's got 50,000 cars a day going up and down.
Yeah.
And now that's my personal opinion. So
Yeah.
we need to be sure that well, no, y'all laugh. 99% of the people who walk in the West Ward do it for exercise.
Yes.
And I don't think you should exercise beside a road with 50,000 cars going beside you. Well,
And
that's why.
I would also like to add very quickly, this whole framework, every single point is optional to do. This is why it is not necessarily a good way to compare cities to each other. It's why it's a rating, not a ranking system. So while we make these recommendations, they of course are all optional. These are just suggestions that lined up from STAR to the strategic plan. Not necessarily things that we want to see happen, but
again, at least for my folks, in my example of the sidewalk, I want to put sidewalks where people can use them to exercise because that's what the demand is in my ward. Mm-hmm. Now, if the other 2 councilmen want people walking up and down Silas Creek Parkway, that's their prerogative.
Right.
Thank you.
Or Business 40.
I don't think these STAR recommendations are the end-all and be-all for decision making.
And that's my point.
I think there's certainly a component of that, and some of them have more validity than others when it comes time to make the decision.
Councilmember Bessie?
Yeah, I think that we've just heard from my good friend and colleague, Councilmember Clark, an example of why it's important that we have a district system in the city for representation. I think can be using census data demonstrated a far more economically diverse ward than Councilmember Clark does. And in the Southwest Ward, what you see along Silas Creek Parkway, substantial stretches, is a great number of people who are walking on the shoulder of a 4-lane road with no curb and gutter and no sidewalk, and they are doing it for transportation. And for their safety, that is why my top single priority sidewalk project in the Southwest Ward is on that impacted section of Silas Creek Parkway. And it's important that we look at the needs of the area that we're talking about. And I absolutely hear what you're saying about, when you're walking for exercise, you don't want to walk on the Silas Creek Parkway section. If you're walking for transportation to get to the store, to get to the bus stop, and those happen to be located along the parkway, then you're going to be walking on the parkway, and we want to make it safe for you to do that. So anyway, kind of the reason that there are arterial road needs for sidewalks.
All right. All right, we thank you all so much for your work. Is there a need for us to accept this or in any way or formally? Okay. Again, all right, thank you for your work.
Thank you.
All right. As mentioned before, item 8 was asked to be held by staff, so we'll skip down to item G9.
Item G9, information regarding zoning regulations governing the location and appearance of motor vehicle repair and maintenance uses.
Sorry for that delay. I'm going to go through as briefly as I can some of the things here. This is a very sticky subject that has a lot of history behind it, so it's probably going to take some time to, I guess, what I would call marinate. But there are some things that could be done in the short term to address some opportunities here. So the current regulations for vehicle repair were adopted by City Council in 1999, of course, Board of Aldermen at that time, after a very contentious process. And just in summary, the current regulations on vehicle repair they are allowed in a wide variety of zoning districts. You see the list there: pedestrian business, highway business, general business, even the entertainment district, going up through industrial and the big box retail, even mixed use. It's allowed with some limitation in the central business district. So there are some limitations that the ordinance places on inoperable vehicles and which is a defined term, that can be stored outside of one of these establishments without being screened or kept in a enclosed building. And that limitation is 2 inoperable vehicles per service bay, or 10 maximum per site. So it's a lot of vehicles that are there, but that was the result of that process that happened in the late 90s. There are also buffer and screening requirements for that. The original adopted UDO in 1995 was more restrictive. It did not allow inoperable vehicles to be stored outside unless it was in an enclosed building or in a screened and buffered motor vehicle storage yard. Existing uses that did not meet that new standard at the time were given 18 months.
That's great. Can we enforce that?
That would be a nice little amortization period there. But 18 months to comply. There was a pretty huge outcry when folks found out about that from the Independent Garage Owners Association and the Wreckers Association, that went straight to City Council at that time, as well as the Planning Board. And the bottom line was the council agreed to postpone enforcement and work on a compromise set of regulations. And that resulted in a 2 to 3 year process to work out, kind of not too different than accessory dwellings, but it was probably much more contentious than that, leading to the current regulations. The existing uses not conforming to those revised standards then had till the end of 2000 to retrofit. So inspections went out toward the end of that period and went to all those sites and made sure that they complied with the revised standards there. And since that time, as you know, with zoning enforcement, it's done only on a complaint basis. So enforcement has been done by complaint, resulting in notices of violations for 25 different locations in that time. 21 of them are in the central city. And when I say central city, I'm talking about growth management areas 1 and 2. So that's most of the central city area. And that's where most of the observed problems or issues have been. The staff has developed a list of known auto repair uses in growth management areas 1 and 2 using a combination of permit information, fire department inspections, and field work. And what we came up with was a list of 157 motor vehicle repair and maintenance uses in Growth Management Area 1 and 2, and they're spread among the different wards as you see there on the slide. 46 in the southeast, 27 in the northeast, 24 in the east, 18, I said south, but that should be southwest, 17 in the south, 16 in north, 9 in northwest, and 0 in the west ward.
You want some, Robert?
How about Mock Tyrone Country Club? Mock Tyrone Country Club.
That's in the GMA 3.
That actually may be your ward too.
That's on the north side.
South side. South side. I'll withdraw the question.
Yeah. Anyway, when you look at a map of where they're located, they're concentrated along the major arterial corridors and also some roads like Indiana Avenue, Old Lexington Road, things like that. So fast forward to potential options. And the first one, I would recommend that maybe we do this one first and find out the results of that before we get serious about considering the others. But one would be to ask the inspection staff, keeping in mind they only respond to complaints right now, ask them to proactively go out and check each current site for compliance and issue notices of violations for any violations they see, and then prepare a report on the results. And then with the results known, then there's some other options that could be considered depending on what the results are. One would be re-examining which districts these uses should be allowed in. It's
Question.
Yes.
Understanding what we currently have on the books in reference to the storage of vehicles, what does that say in reference to the storage of car parts, such as tires?
Right.
We're getting a lot of those now too.
And on that same site, so it's a repair shop, but they have 200 tires stacked in front of their building.
Right. We've had some enforcement issues with those before. I would have to say, I don't have any, but that goes beyond just only your fire implications as well. And fire used to heavily. They can't hear them. Fire used to heavily address that over a course of time, probably in the early to mid 2000s, but there hasn't been a push for that from them. But there's certainly a fire code implication. There's also a environmental health and health department concern because of the retention of water and breeding of mosquitoes. So it falls. I'd have to look at it from a zoning perspective. It's probably a violation, especially if they're not behind the motor vehicle storage, or certainly if they're sitting out, it's an issue. If they're in the motor vehicle storage, I think they're fine, but there's still the problems with fire and environmental health.
Okay, I just know at least right offhand at least 3 folks that will fail any test that you go and look at it. And this one, the late Walter Marshall called me at least about one place once a month to tell me about that was in violation for their tires. So.
Well, and that would be the value in going with this step number 1 first. Have staff proactively go out and look at them, and if they find places like that, then they can pursue those as violations there. And then your other ones are examine what zoning districts should be allowed for this use, or alternatively allowed in certain districts or within a certain distance of residential zoning only with, again, elect the body SUP if you want, or re-examine what vehicle storage, landscaping, or screening requirements should apply to new uses, and then finally look at if new standards are developed for that, how do we handle retrofitting previous uses? I just want to kind of remind everybody that there is this history of a pretty active response by the folks who are impacted on this. So if we go down that road on a number of these, you may be hearing from a lot of people about that. But we would be glad to at least start with number 1 if you want us to pursue that.
Councilmember Bessie.
Yeah, I was just thinking if staff time is an issue, we might do a sort of a targeted pilot sweep review. Let's say like pick sites in the north and east wards and say, we're going to check each one. If that turns up a high enough violation percentage, we could expand that citywide.
Councilmember Adams and then Clark.
Yeah. I was going to say I can understand the people that feel like we may be harassing them or attempting to impact their livelihood. But I also recognize that most of these places are very close to residential and children and old people. And my concern is that, unfortunately for us, this is a growth. We're supposed to manage the growth. But this is a growth that I don't think we really managed well over the past few years. If we're always talking about how important zoning and development and these area plans are, I think it's our fault, even though most of us weren't here when all of this started to happen, that we've allowed this to take place within our inner city. Again, you got to look at it. It's where our poorest neighborhoods are. That could be environmental discrimination. I mean, it is what it is. But I feel like if we don't get this under control, again, where we are right now is when we look at people developing and we have prepared the areas, Mr. Garrity, where we feel like development should take place within these poorer neighborhoods. Most of the time it's turned down because they're brownfields. And they're brownfields because there were service stations, tire yards, cleaners, all kinds of stuff. We need to get a handle on this, some kind of way, going forward.
Councilmember Clark and McIntosh.
I'd be curious what the ordinance is on car storage, because some places I drive by, and I'm thinking of Northwest Boulevard, but there are many others, there's no way they're repairing all those cars.
No.
It's a junkyard, and I guess they keep the cars if they ever need a part or whatever it may be. But
well, again, the current ordinance, as it was amended by council, allows a whole lot of leeway, up to 10 inoperable vehicles to be stored anywhere on the lot without being screened.
Oh, I think we'll go way past that number. Yeah. But
Jaguar place.
He was on that council.
You say to inspect these, don't we? Are those our inspectors?
Our city county inspection staff could do that. Now, they're probably, I think I'd want to get some advice from the city attorney here, but I think we would need to kind of evenly kind of use our inspection staff rather than kind of just picking on one area and only enforcing there. But
yes.
but I think by focusing first on the GMA 1 and 2 area, you're going to hit most of the areas that I think Councilmember Adams was concerned about there. But we could do that, I think, over probably a several month period of time, maybe, I don't know whether it be 2 to 3 months or something like that, and then at the end of that, compile a report to you all so that you can decide what other further action you want to take.
I think it would take 6 months, whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes.
We might not be here by the time they finish. If they take too long.
No, they're not going to take too long. We're going to 18 minutes.
18 minutes.
18 minutes.
18 minutes.
I'm just joking. But
I would prefer that we take the approach that he just described instead of targeting certain areas. I don't want to be accused of arbitrary.
Okay. Councilman McIntyre.
This strikes me as a problem that almost seems better addressed by a form-based code versus a land use code. The fact that there are 0 of these in the West Ward tells me that it's an economic issue. And I grew up working in a gas station. The number of people who are trying to eke out the last couple of years of their vehicle being in use, they're people with less money and they're taking them to the local garage. So I don't think we want to impact people's access to those, but we want to impact how they look and how they impact the folks around them. So I want to be careful not to eliminate their existing in neighborhoods because they're a service that I think is very necessary, but I think it's how they look and how they operate that we have problems with.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Although I don't think that it's the best way, there's at least, and everybody probably knows one in their ward, one place if you have a car that won't pass inspection, there's a place you can take it that will help you pass inspection, and that's an economic, but it's an economic question because the person doesn't pass inspection.
The dealership won't do that for
right. But Councilman Adams.
But I agree with you, Councilmember McIntosh. this wouldn't probably be a problem for the community if the appearances of these places were somewhat better.
Mm-hmm.
I know they're not going to be able to just make it all like pristine, but better, so that hopefully we could have attracted or attract other economic development. We don't want to, again, impact their livelihoods. But just like the persons, as we say, that live in the community, that we're so quick to have their houses torn down or condemned because they don't agree with the community and the way we want it to look and appear, this is basically, to me, the same thing. I can't have people coming in doing things, and I got cars and tires lining a major thoroughfare, and even now off from the thoroughfare, I'm beginning to see it creep down other streets. So I'm concerned because, yes, we got a lot of empty buildings in the urban core communities, but I'm afraid that all we're going to be able to attract, if we continue down this path and not get a handle on the zoning piece, we won't be able to attract anything. I think we all remember the fire right off 52 years ago, back in the, 90s?
Huge fire.
Behind McLean Trucking.
It reminded me of California when you look back. It was that to us, and not to say minimize that in California, but it was something we never seen before.
Councilman Bessie?
I think I know why nobody sitting around the committee here remembers the specifics of the original attempt to regulate, because none of us were on the council at that point.
Sure, he wasn't on it.
No, we were both elected at the same time in November of 2001.
None of us here were on the council.
But the only, Mayor Pro Tem Burke was the only currently serving official who was on at that time. In the late 90s is when this was being battled out.
I should make my quick comment. I think it is very much of an economic issue, and the reason those tires are sitting there, what's it cost, $5-10 to take a tire to the landfill? Something? Well, I can store 400 in the backyard for free. Out on Country Club Road, y'all don't know where the new rough housing is. It's very much a gentrified building, but it's where the new dog.
Yeah, Little Richards.
Yeah, and when they started building, they found 13 dump truck loads of tires buried there. And they were buried because it's a lot cheaper to dump them in a ditch than it is to take them to the landfill. So I do think it's very much of an economic issue.
Yeah, and so I think from what I've heard, the consensus is being able to move forward with being going out and looking at these particular two areas, and the GMAs, two GMAs.
One and two.
One and two GMAs. All right. All right. And beginning to go out and look at the enforcement on these and bring that information back so that we can make any additional recommendations on the list of items that are there. One thing I do want, Brandon, I don't know, to go back to what was mentioned before about the closing the loop, but on our 311 app, there is a place on there that says report that lets you take a picture, lets you submit an item. I don't know if it goes into the,
It works.
It works.
Cloud.
Well, I know I've submitted some things too, but I'm just saying in terms of for people, just from a community standpoint, I don't know how well we do of advertising to the community the fact that that's something that they have the ability to utilize so that it's not as onerous just on city staff to be out there firsthand, because they may see something one day and they might not see it the next day. But when you have these kind of tools, citizens become the eyes and ears of the city.
I think what happens is that people make the report using those tools or using the phone or using the computer, and then they never hear back that what was done with their claim. And what happens is that the CityLink staff will dutifully report it to the department that's responsible for doing that. Some of the inspection follow-up issues that we've had and so that we need a tracking mechanism so that we know what happens and the citizen knows.
Right. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just kind of confirm, we'll not only be doing those inspections, but any that we find that are in violation, we would also be issuing violation notices.
Yeah.
We'll give you a heads up because you'll start getting calls. So.
Yeah.
The ones I know in my ward, that you can call, but it won't make a difference. I drive by them every day, so they may be welcome to many in the
All I'm
community.
asking them to do is come better.
Item G10.
Item G10, information regarding an ordinance amending Chapter 10, Division 1 of the City Code entitled Housing Code regarding carbon monoxide alarms, detectors, and mold.
I'll do the presentation on this, Mr. Chairman. The purpose of this ordinance amendment is to basically start a discussion about two items: carbon monoxide detectors and circumstances or conditions that lead to mold. If you will turn to the ordinance and go to the last page, we'll talk about carbon monoxide detectors first. And basically, on page 5 of the ordinance, it provides that by December 1st of 2018, each existing occupied dwelling unit should have at least one operable carbon monoxide alarm per level, either battery operated or electrical, basically consistent with the standards, installed and maintained in accordance with those standards. It applies to dwelling units having a fossil fuel burning heater, appliance, or fireplace, and any dwelling unit having an attached garage. Again, it applies to existing occupied dwelling units. Much of the language came from Section 4242 of the state statute, which deals with fit premises. In particular, for carbon monoxide detectors, it is in Section 7 of 42-42, where basically all rental units at this point in time are required to have a carbon monoxide detector on each level. So this would apply to all existing occupied units and to be installed by December 1st of next year. That's the first provision. You want to go to the next one?
So,
Mr. McIntyre?
the state requires this currently for all rental units, but the state does not require it for
Private.
homeowner.
Existing occupied units. Now, if you're going to make modifications, then the building code will kick in, and you may have to install
Okay,
it.
and so if you're building a new house, for instance,
Right.
that would apply.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that in a purchase transaction, when a home inspector goes out, that's an item on the checklist, whether it's state required or not. That comes up in virtually every case.
So I anticipate the impact should be minimal because rental units are already required to have them. It's required for new construction and for certain alterations. So you're talking about pretty much home occupied units at this point. And the cost seems to be around $15 to $20, which I know can be difficult for some folks, but that's the reason why it's delayed until December 1st of 2018.
And in particular, what is there for let's say for a renter who's in a home that's a single family house and they don't have that? Who do they and their landlord doesn't provide for that?
If it's added to the code, then that would be something that the community development inspectors will inspect for once that time period expires. And then if they don't have it, they will be cited and may be required to install it in accordance with the city code. Okay. Now, in terms of the state statute, I guess that's something they can take the landlord to court over. But by putting it in the code, then the city code.
Mr. McIntyre?
Sir, what's the enforcement mechanism?
Generally, if you don't have it, they'll issue a complaint and notice of hearing under the housing code. You'll have a hearing, show cause why an order should not be issued against you. If an order is issued, you're given a time period, generally about 30 days, to install it. If you don't install it within the required time period, then a citation is issued. Then you find $350, I think, for the first day, and I think $100 each day after until it's installed.
That's on a rental, but an owner occupied.
It doesn't matter because we can't make that distinction. It applies regardless.
But there's no real enforcement mechanism on owner occupied.
No, not now. Right. But the same, technically, if it goes in the code, the same enforcement mechanism would apply to landlords and homeowners.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so individual homeowners lived in the house for 20 years. They will now be required by ordinance to have this device in their house.
After that date.
If they have a fossil fuel burning.
Okay, so they had an electric water heater, and they put in a gas water heater. Kicks in the requirement that they have one of these units.
If they install the gas water heater, then inspection should require that they already get one put in.
That they would have, they would have to at that point have, that would be part of the inspection process for installation of a new HVAC or anything like that that would require.
They shouldn't pass inspection without having.
Otherwise, people who live quietly in their houses, and I mean, I think it's a great idea to have one of these. I have them in my house, but it's sort of a unfunded mandate to the individual homeowner, and I'm sort of curious. It doesn't sound to me like we have an enforcement mechanism. Nobody's going to go into the house unless it's building inspectors for HVAC or some change that's going to be made. But it is a requirement that we are now imposing upon homeowners that will have a $30 expense, probably.
Walmart had them as cheap as
$15.
Yeah.
And I was curious that, so it has to be operational, but defining operational, I was curious about the second paragraph that says, that not responsible for the battery or electricity. And I understand that in rental property, of course, the renter pays for the electricity, and theoretically now they have to pay for the battery to activate these things. So if somebody had a battery-operated one in the rental property and they didn't put the batteries in it, who's responsible for that?
the notice. If it's not operable at the time of this passes and it's not operable at the time of inspection, the complaint notice of hearing would go to the landlord, and then the landlord could very easily put a battery in to show that it's operable.
So paragraph 2.
Which is kind of the same thing they do with respect to the smoke detectors.
Smoke detectors. So the renter, the landlord is ultimately responsible to have these units active and operational. Is that what? Yeah.
Technically, yes.
Okay.
But in terms of putting the battery in and
that's the point. Paying for it and maintaining it. Yeah. Well, okay.
But getting back to your earlier point, in terms of inspections, generally they do inspections for the most part when a tenant calls to complain. A homeowner is not going to call and say, come out and check my home because I don't have a carbon monoxide detector. So the chances are, I would hope, because they do serve a purpose from a safety standpoint, that they would install the carbon monoxide detector, but the chances are that it's not going to be the homeowner that's being cited.
This reminds me sort of automobile safety belts or something. It's the same sort of government sort of getting involved in making sure we're all safe.
Yeah.
Until someone dies, no one wants you to be a part. So.
We're libertarian here.
I would say and I didn't ask for this specific piece, but I had a member of the congregation who died from carbon monoxide poison due to the fact that there was not an operable carbon monoxide detector in the home. They were utilizing a kerosene form of heating in the home. Her and her boyfriend died due to carbon monoxide poison.
You actually had a constituent that called about a year ago about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the first part.
That's easy. Yeah.
The next, I guess, revision related to conditions that contribute to mold. I also looked at 42-42 of the state statute, which has language relating to conditions that lead to mold. I also looked at the Durham City Code and Henderson County City Code just for some language. There are not very many codes that have language that address mold. And essentially what I came up with, if you'll bear with me, you'll find the language on a couple of pages. At the top of the second page of the ordinance, which is the language that comes out of, it's number 13, comes out of the state statute. Excessive standing water, sewage, or flooding problems caused by plumbing leaks or inadequate drainage that may contribute to mosquito infestation or mold. You go to the third page, number 24. Every dwelling unit shall be maintained so as to prevent persistent excessive dampness or moisture on interior or exterior surfaces. Building materials discolored or deteriorated by mold or mildew shall be cleaned, dried, and repaired. That's from Durham. The next one is under standards G, 1G. And this is also from Durham. Foundation drainage shall be provided and maintained so as to prevent standing water or other conditions so as to avoid the presence of mold. Crawl spaces shall be free of high moisture conditions or sealed from dwelling areas. Basically, the object of the language in every section is to deal with those conditions that tend to contribute to mold. Dampness, standing water, things of that nature. So basically, this will be another basis for the inspector to cite the property owner and hopefully have the property owner, landlord, owner-occupied property owner, eliminate the conditions themselves that lead to the mold. And by eliminating the conditions themselves and then eliminating the mold, hopefully that will eradicate the situation, not cause it to be repeated. Again, not much guidance out there in terms of other municipalities. I took the language from the state statute, from Durham, the city of Durham, and Henderson County. So that's what we have.
Councilman Adams?
Yes. We do hear of cases of constituents and people coming to us during our public comment period or through email notifying us of issues of safety for their families. Personally, whether it's the carbon monoxide or the mold, I think it is our responsibility to try to facilitate making life better. When we talk about the STAR, sustainability, quality of life, environment, all of that is still wrapped up in that. So if we're not the ones that's helping to craft and facilitate the policies and ordinances to protect our citizens, those people that do not want to take on their responsibility as landlords and other things, then I do believe it's up to us to ensure that they have a product that people are renting and paying their money and they're putting their families and babies in it, that they're not at harm. So I'm glad to see us going in this direction because it's very easy for these older houses, particularly that we have housing stock in our communities, particularly, again, our urban core, to have these conditions and nobody even really does anything until our folks call the inspections department to complain. By then, their children and loved ones are sick. And I can tell you firsthand that I had a mold infestation under my house. And it never occurred to me when I was sick 4 years ago that that helped to exacerbate my illness. When the inspectors for the county or whoever came out, the city and others, and the people that had to, get rid of it, they wouldn't even let me go under the house. I had to move out of the house in order for them to eradicate it. So I know how important this can be if it goes on and on and on. It was the summer when we had all that rain. It was bad. So I'm glad to see this happening.
Councilman McIntyre?
How long has Durham's been in effect? What's their sort of
I'm not sure. I think it's been there a couple of years. I think it's longer than 2 years. I can double check.
I'd be interested to see some of the language, and it seems a little bit vague.
I understand. And they're, like this one, trying to get to the conditions that contribute to mold.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I guess one of my other concerns would be that you can have hidden defects or known defects, and I think it would be unfair to cite somebody for a problem that nobody knew existed until they knew it existed. But if it's a problem that someone's notified about and doesn't do anything about, that's a completely different matter. So we want to deal with that, I think.
Right. Again, the same process under the housing code applies to other conditions would apply to this, which means you'll get a complaint notice of hearing, an opportunity to have the hearing, and then an order to make the repairs or correct the conditions that contributed to the mold or what appears to be mold, and then if you don't, do anything.
Then to go to Councilmember Adams' point, when you find a mold condition that's there, it calls for immediate and sometimes dramatic action.
It
remove, getting out of it and having it go. So, or we provide any direction or any direction to folks.
I can tell you what we've done in some other cases, which is to get with the landlord and try to facilitate the, movement of that person.
Emergency relocation.
Yeah, that property, emergency relocation from that property. So the same thing would apply.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Larson, it's 6 o'clock.
Can we get a definition of mold
I can put it
in our terms? Because if that's going to be something enforceable, I think we need to know exactly what it is. And then, second of all, I like the idea that what we're talking about is the cause of mold. Really, a lot of this ordinance is directed toward what generates an environment that allows mold to occur. Those conditions of bad gutters, bad drainage, water in the basement, bad sewage issues, those should be addressed anyway. This is another layer of an afterthought or an after occurrence that comes from those bad water issues that occur in the house or bad environmental issues. And then, so the really question sort of revolves around, once you have that, what in this ordinance demands remediation, and how is that to be conducted of a mold, if mold is defined as a particular thing and not just coal dust or something else that happens to be on the building. So, I'm all for this. I think, it feathers in very nicely with the overall inspection process, but I think there is a little looseness in the sense of how this is going to be inspected and ultimately enforced, but it does draw attention to the issue in an ordinance, and I would support that.
All right. I think this is more so for direction to frame. I know I've gotten, again, from community engagement on both of these subject matters, particularly in terms of one with mold is one that I've engaged with citizens on specifically, and some of the ability for the city to take action has been constrained for the lack of having anything within our actual code to cite that landlord to make them take action to remediate anything. And so I think moving towards a place where we can actually have something, and these are instances where landlords are aware, and for both of these items specifically, I think it will impact single-family rented properties more than a single-family owner-occupied property, which I think, at least from my perspective, is actually normally the places where we have more issues, folks not willing to take care of it. If a homeowner finds an issue, they're probably more than likely they're going to try to remediate that and deal with it, and sometimes our renters are left to fend for themselves in some of these situations. So with that said, Ms. Attorney, you have some direction and thought? Okay.
Try to bring it back, not January 5th.
Okay. All right.
It looks like we don't have a huge crowd of citizens waiting for us, so why don't we start at 6:10?
6:10. All right. Mr. McIntosh.
I would like to call attention to the city manager's inventory of holiday ties that he's been wearing. Got some really nice.
For the record,
ties.
We have a photo op.
Let it be noted in the record.
All right.
Yep. All right. We'll consider ourselves adjourned.